Using a 13mm socket, remove the factory engine skid plate. After removing the factory engine skid, install the 4 bolts back to the factory location. So you'll be removing this brace, followed by this skid plate, and this skid plate for your transmission. To remove these, you'll have 11 total bolts. So you have an 18mm bolt located here, here, and here. Moving back, you have another 6 located here, 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 2 here, and 1 last bolt here. Then to finish it up, you have 2 13mm bolts located here and here that you'll remove using a socket or impact wrench. Using your 4111-6 bracket, position it onto your engine skid plate and run a button head bolt with 1 zinc plated washer through each of the PIM nuts. Using a 7/32 Allen wrench, tighten your 4111-6 bracket fully to the engine skid plate. So with 1 18mm bolt sucked snugly into the frame, you're going to tape off where you're going to cut on this bracket and make it flush with the bottom of your cross member. Now remove this bolt so that you can make a clean cut on this bracket. After removing the bracket portion, place a dot in the center of the bracket just after this dimple. You're going to take a 1/4" drill bit and drill straight through that dot. So everything taped off on this blue for this bracket, we are going to cut and remove this bubble on this bracket. By removing the bolts, you've given yourself room to cut this without scratching your frame or cutting into any components you don't want to get into. After drilling your 1/4" hole, take a zinc-coated washer as well as your Allen button head bolt to secure the bracket into place. Then snug it up using a 5/32 Allen key. Using a 13mm wrench, break loose and remove the engine mount bolt to install your longer hardware. Install your new longer bolt into the engine mount and replace this bolt. Taking your 4111-5 bracket and your flange nut, install the bracket on the driver's side of the engine bay. Loosely install the nut and all following hardware until specified to tighten. Grabbing your 4111-4 bracket as well as another flange nut, place the bracket onto the passenger side of the engine bay. Install hardware loosely. Make sure that the fuel tank is properly supported before removing or installing new components. Using a 13mm socket, remove the 2 bolts holding the crossmember to the fuel skid. Using a 10mm wrench, remove the nut on the crossmember holding down your coolant lines. Using the same 10mm wrench, remove this final bolt on the crossmember. Using an 18mm socket, remove the 4 bolts holding the crossmember up to the chassis. Using a 10mm socket, loosen these 2 bolts on your coolant lines. Removing the 10mm nut on top of this bolt, as well as the 10mm nut here to release any wires from the fuel tank. Using an 18mm socket, remove the factory gas tank strap. Take your new gas tank strap and install it into place using the same factory hardware. Next, take your new hardware, an aluminum countersunk washer, and use a 7/32 bit to install it into our new fuel tank strap. To protect your fuel tank from any of our bolts going into your tank or scraping or making noise, you are supplied with weather stripping that has a peelable backing. So begin peeling off the top, lay it into place just at the top here, and go ahead and remove the backing and stick it as you go. Taking an aluminum countersunk washer, as well as one of our bolts, place the rubber side, fuel tank side in first, and loosely screw it into place. Now that you have the other side in, use these 2 bolts to secure these 2 holes onto your battery pack plate. Again, loosely install all hardware until told to tighten. Now, using another one of these bolts, as well as a aluminum countersunk washer, install the last hole on your new crossmember. Now that we have our evap canister set up from our brackets, we're going to remove this whole unit and reconnect it to our evap lines. You can see these 3 lines here. So this will just be simply grabbing the line and pulling it down onto it till you hear it click on. Taking a small button head as well as a zinc plated washer, use it to install your coolant lines onto your evap canister bracket. Now fully tighten it, as you will not be able to access this bolt once the skid plate is on. Using 2 Allen head button head bolts and 2 zinc plated washers, grab a frame mount as well as your 2-hole nut backing plate and install them into these 2 holes here on your transfer case skid plate. Using the removed countersunk washer and countersunk bolt from the cross member, use it to reinstall the transfer case into the cross member. Taking your zinc plated frame side bracket, as well as 2 button head bolts and 2 zinc plated washers and your double PEM nut backing plate. Install it into these 2 holes on your fuel skid. Take your 4111-13 and 4111-14 brackets, 4 carriage bolts, 4 nylon lock nuts, and 4 zinc plated washers. You will put the 4111-13 bracket oriented like this on these 2 holes, and your 4111-14 bracket oriented this way on the skid plate. Using an 18mm socket, tighten the 2 factory bolts to secure your fuel skid plate brackets to the frame before using a 14mm socket to secure the 4 bolts on the bottom of the skid plate. Using the UB1026 bracket and 2 of the button head bolts, install it into the notch on the Bellypan skid plate. Install the remaining 1026 bracket into the last notch on the Bellypan skid. Remove the 6 bolts located on the skid plate. 1 here, 2, so 4 on the bottom, and then 2 up top, up in here. You will keep 2 of these factory bolts for this install. Using a ratchet and a 10mm socket, remove these 3 M6 bolts on your power pack skid plate. You will keep all 3 of these bolts for install of the new bracket. Using a 16mm socket, remove these 2 M12 bolts holding onto the power pack skid plate. Using the same 16mm socket, remove these 2 M12 bolts holding up your power pack skid plate. You will keep 2 of these bolts for installing your new power pack skid plate. Using a 16mm socket, undo these 5 M12 bolts. 1 up here behind this exhaust that you can't see. 1 here, and the last one here. The remaining bolts above the exhaust are hard to get to, so we're going to be using a 16mm wrench. Using a 13mm socket, undo the remaining bolt on your battery pack skid plate. When upgrading to an existing system, loosen these 2 bolts on the skid plate to relieve the pressure on the power pack skid plate. Using the removed 18mm bolt and the 4127-4 bracket, install it into place using the same bolt. Use a 13mm wrench to remove this 1 bolt. Using the removed bolt, install the 4127-7 bracket into place. Reinstall the 2 16mm head bolts into the 4127-7 bracket. Reinstall the 2 factory 13mm head bolts onto the 4127-6 bracket. Reinstall the three 10mm head bolts into the 4127-7 bracket. Using an 18mm socket and an extension, remove the factory bolt. Reinstall the factory 18mm head bolt with the 4127-9 bracket. Using the provided flag nut, we are going to use a magnet to help lock it into place to avoid it dropping into the frame. Insert this through this hole up above in the exhaust and guide it down into this opening. Using a 4127-4 bracket, a zinc-plated hex bolt and washer, install this into your nut plate right here. Using a jack to support or a helping hand, lift the skid plate up into place. Install the two button head bolts with zinc plated washers into this side of the skid plate. Install the two M12 coated countersunk bolts with two countersunk aluminum washers into the frame side brackets. Use the four button head bolts with zinc plated washers to install the skid plate closest to the drive shaft. Install the two remaining button head bolts with zinc plated washers. Install these two 3/8 countersunk bolts into the skid plate. After drilling a pilot hole, use a 3/8 drill bit to finish drilling a hole so you can run a nut cert on the back and drill in your final bolt. Using a countersunk bolt, as well as our aluminum countersunk washer and a flag nut, use the new drilled hole and put your flag nut in, rotate it until you can see it. And thread in your nut. At this point, using a 7/32 Allen, tighten this bolt as well as any other hardware used for this install.